10 common warning signs of mental health conditions. Feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. Seriously trying to harm or kill oneself or making plans to do so. You know, there used to be this old wives' tale that if somebody says they're going to commit suicide, they're just looking for attention. You need to take that extremely seriously. Severe out of control or risk-taking behaviors that can cause harm to self or others. Sudden overwhelming fear for no reason, sometimes with a racing heart, physical discomfort or fast breathing. It almost sort of mimics the anxiety. Intense worries or fears that get in the way of daily activities, like hanging out with friends or going to classes. Drug and alcohol use is also another warning sign, can be another warning sign of mental health challenges. Excessive use can trigger a mental health condition. Alcohol and some drugs are depressants, so people think that they're going to be sort of buoyed by drinking and they're going to get up. And in fact, what it does to the brain is it acts as a depressant. So if someone is already depressed, that's only going to make it worse for them. Some people can mask the existence of a mental health issue by using drugs or alcohol. Using prescription drugs that are not yours is harmful to your physical and mental health. It poses a major risk. Using alcohol or drugs to cope with stress or other negative feelings indicates a problem that should be immediately addressed. So what a lot of people do is they try to they feel different, they don't feel like themselves, maybe they feel down or they just feel different. And they may try to sort of fit in by drinking or using drugs just to sort of take them away from that feeling that they have. Suicide warning signs, talking about hopelessness, worthlessness, having no motivation or losing interest in activities that were once enjoyed, withdrawing or being isolated, a sudden change in personality, giving away possessions or behaving recklessly. And behaving recklessly can look like using excessive amounts of drugs or alcohol, but it can also be, I'm going to go up on the top of that roof and I'm going to see if I can fly off. I'm going to drive my car 90 miles an hour and I don't care. Talking about death or not being here tomorrow, looking for ways to kill oneself, such as searching online or buying a gun, all warning signs of suicide. This is important because suicide is the second leading cause of death among college students. The second leading cause of death. More young adults die from suicide than from cancer, heart disease, AIDS, birth defects, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, and chronic lung disease combined. So it's an epidemic, and it's an epidemic on college campuses. 7% of students have seriously considered suicide during the past year, and 90% of those who commit suicide had an underlying mental health condition. Always take these warning signs very seriously, telling somebody, you take action right away by telling somebody you trust. So if somebody, confides in you, you want to take that information very seriously. You want to either call the National Suicide Lifeline or suggest that the person do that so that they can talk to somebody immediately, or calling your campus crisis hotline if there is a hotline here on campus. You need to educate yourself to find out what to do if you see the warning signs. Let's try this.
My name is Steve Pinker. I'm a professor in the psychology department at Harvard, and I'm interested in how the mind works. And that includes being interested in anxiety and depression and all of the kinds of mental anguish that we as human beings go through. All of us, including me. Why do we feel bad? Well, there's something good about feeling bad, namely in the same way that it's good that we have the capacity for physical pain. That's why we don't drink scalding coffee or deliberately bang our heads with a hammer. It hurts and it protects us. Some of our mental pain is there to protect us against some bad choices. And that's why everyone in their lives does go through anxiety. That's why they go through depression. Anxiety can motivate you in small amounts. Depression can cause you to reevaluate things that have gone wrong in your life in small amounts. It's just that when it's more than small amounts, just like pain that is beyond what you need to tell you to take care of yourself, it's something that ought to be treated and something that can be treated. It can go, there can be too much of it. Also, one of the paradoxical parts of being depressed is that the part of the mind that assesses what life will be like is not working properly. So when you're depressed, and I know this talking to depressed people, I know this from my own depression, you objectively think, not only am I sad now, but I will always be sad. Life will always be horrible. There's no possibility for it to improve. One thing that you always have to keep in mind is that the part of the mind that's making you think that is not working properly, because things will get better, things can get better, particularly if you seek help. And as hard as it is to believe, and I know from personal experience it's impossible to believe this, but it's true. Even when you're depressed, there will be a day in which you wake up and the sun is shining and birds are singing and people are nice all over again. As hard as it is to believe that that day will come when you're in the midst of depression and the part of your mind that's figuring out what life is going to be like is not working properly, that will happen to you, particularly if you seek help and you realize that you're not alone, that it's not that you are sick or defective. There's a part of your mind that is making you think that way, but not forever. So speak up, you're not alone.
So if you see the warning signs, this is really to somebody, you want to tell somebody you trust. You don't need to go at it alone. You may want to involve others who can help provide the right support. So somebody may come to you and talk with you about how it is that they're feeling. There are many people who are available and willing to help. Friends and family, residential assistants or advisors, campus counseling center, on-campus healthcare providers, faith-based leaders, faculty advisors, sorority and fraternity chapter mentors and advisors. So all of this is really just to demonstrate that there is a network that people can tap into if they're feeling really bad or if they're concerned about how they're feeling. So if you see the warning signs, you want to offer support, you want to ask the person what you can do to help. You can suggest specific things that might help, like how can I best support you? Always a really, really good question to ask. How can I help you? How can I support you? Is there any information or resources that I can find for you? Remember that suicide hotline or some sort of campus line that they can call. Can I help you locate mental health services and supports? Can I help you make an appointment? Can I help you with your errands until you're feeling better? Would you like me to go with you to a support group or a meeting? Do you need a ride to any of your appointments? I mean, the message here is try to help the individual as much as possible and as much as he or she will let you help them. You want to be a friend, you can play an important role in helping your friend build a positive social support network. And after you extend some of the support that we talked about just before, you want to make sure that you check in regularly with this individual. You don't want to just do it once and say, okay, I gave him the suicide hotline number, he should be okay now. You want to include your friend if it's students on campus, include your friend in your plans. Ask how you can be supportive. Learn more about mental illness. Learn more about what it is that the individual may be going through. And avoid using judgmental or dismissive language such as you'll get over it, toughen up, or snap out of it. Absolutely useless. It's critically important to know that this is a medical condition. We call it behavioral health because that's how it's exhibited, but it's a medical condition. So someone with depression can no sooner snap out of it than somebody with cancer can snap out of it. Help is available. You want to become familiar and offer information about resources. These are some of the resources. Student support groups and clubs like NAMI on campus or Active Minds can be extremely beneficial to students on a school campus. You want to provide hope and encouragement. These are just some resources where people can go. Strength of Us is actually an online blog for youth and young adults where they can talk with other youth and young adults who are living with mental health challenges. It's a way to sort of privately connect with people who are experiencing those kinds of issues, and in that way feel that you're part of a community.
So, Kate?
Yes.
So we can refer students to that site?
That's correct. That's correct. Any of those sites, actually. If you see warning signs, you want to provide hope and encouragement. If your friend would rather speak to someone online, refer them to one of these online chat resources, the Trevor Project, Crisis Chat, or I'm Alive. All right? And then taking action. You want to check to see if there are mental health awareness groups like NAMI on campus or Active Minds. Check with the counseling center if you have one on campus to see what resources they provide and can share. Check to see if the Dean of Students office has resources you can use. And get organized and get going. One of the things is, if you can't find any of this information on campus, if somebody says to you, I really think I need to see somebody, don't forget the number 211. 211 is info line here in Connecticut. They have a vast resource directory of providers, of support groups, of places where people can go for help. So if you remember nothing else, remember 211. And either you can call that and find out, help your friend or help the student potentially to identify a place where they can go, or you can give that information to the individual and he or she could call themselves. No resources, no problem. NAMI has resources on mental health information and services that you can distribute. We have templates that you can customize with resources that you do have on campus. We have fact sheets with key information about mental health on college campuses. They're both available at www.nami.org, NAMI on campus. And these are some options for where you can raise awareness. If you don't know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, the whole month of May. A good time to provide information can be campus tours, orientation, move-in day if you had dorms, existing campus-wide events. Is there a way to include mental health information in what's already planned to happen on campus? Hearings and meetings, health advisory boards can be established. Maybe there is one on campus already. Mental health awareness days and weeks, dorm meetings or sorority, fraternity chapter meetings, and finals week. Finals week because why? People are under intense anxiety and stress, okay? So it's really good to know, where that people can know where they can turn if in fact they're feeling more than the typical stress and anxiety. And these are some other ways to get the word out. Creative expressions, a stress-free day, a day on campus where maybe there's free massages and nutrition counseling, but there's also information about mental health available. Activities fair, again, set up a mental health awareness table. Movie screenings, there's a lot of screenings that college campuses can do that will sort of shed insight into or onto mental health and mental health conditions and the fact that there's hope and that there's help. And send silence packing, work with Active Minds or NAMI on campus, all sorts of things. So I'm sure you can think of many more than this given what's already going on campus. Here's some simple ways to spread awareness. Put brain stickers around campus. Have regular announcements in newspapers, on student radio shows and related media. Put mental health information on the school homepage. Place posters, stickers, or pamphlets in dorm bathrooms. Put flyers and posters in campus buses if you have. Post mental health facts around campus. Start a social media campaign using Facebook and Twitter. You can make a difference. We won't watch that one. And then educate others. So I just want to thank you for your leadership and commitment to mental health awareness. Simply by attending this presentation, you've made a difference in someone's life. And if you want, you can take a survey regarding this presentation at that SurveyMonkey address. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the lights on and see if anybody has any questions. Can I just turn this up?
Yeah.
Great. I know, right? Ooh, hello. The sun is out again. Any questions? Comments? Yes.
One of the things that's not addressed in this is that, for example, I teach only online. And because I teach in psychology, I tend to, people like to talk about stuff. What can we look for in comments or queries that are not blatantly addressing a mental health issue that gives us some clues that, you know, should I refer them to something online or should I make sure that they see somebody in person?
I think you're looking for cues that are going to not be that dissimilar than if you were actually dealing with the individual face-to-face. So you could have somebody who, for instance, was doing really well in your class, and now they're doing really poorly.
Yeah, that's obvious. But, you know, there are, I think there's a freedom also online that students sometimes, you don't know whether they're just being cranky with you or, dear God, I'm glad I'm not on campus because I'm sure my tires would be split.
Right. I think you want to err on the side of caution. So if there's some sort of red flag that comes up, you know, you may want to ask just, you know, sort of very preliminary questions. You know, are you looking for some kind of help? Can I help you with anything? I think also if you have somebody who may, in particular in psychology, there could be something that could sort of ignite something for somebody, you know, something that you're studying. So you may want to ask, is there anything in particular that we've just been looking at that troubles you, that you have questions on, those kinds of things.
Great way to frame it. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Comments? Yes.
You've done this presentation for different schools where you've had students experiencing it up to this point, and it seems like something that would be good for some of the students that we have as well.
It was actually meant for students. You might not have been here in the beginning, but I thought it was useful to use it for this presentation as well. But this is actually something that NAMI put together nationally and is used on campuses across the country. All right? Yeah.
I'm struggling with trying to formulate a question, and it deals with depression and productivity in depression. And some people who have a real significant problem with depression maintain a high level of productivity. And I guess I'm wondering about the phrase mental illness. It's charged with meaning.
Yep.
And it can be used as an excuse to exclude people.
Mm-hmm.
And some people who have significant problems with depression or significant problems with anxiety are extremely productive. Pay a very high price for it, but it's extremely productive. So, what am I asking you? I'm having trouble with the expression mental illness as a word that covers depression. I think that's what I'm having trouble with.
Well, I think it's important to understand that let's stick on depression. Everybody's depression is going to be different than everybody else's, all right? And I would underscore your comment that the productivity probably comes at a high price. I knew somebody who had serious depression, and he was able to function. He worked in banking. He was able to function. He had a high-level job, and he would go home every night, and he would, by 6 o'clock, be in a bathrobe on his couch in the dark, basically sort of trying to recharge himself so he could get up the next day and do it again. And the weekends, he would just close the blinds and stay in. So depression pretty much is going to have some aspect of that kind of behavior where someone's going to be down. It is one of the most common mental illnesses. And when we talk about mental illness, there really is no good word for it. There are crappy words for it, you know. Mental health challenge is something that sort of softens it a little bit. But I also think we want to talk about it in those terms because, you know, we used to back off of talking about cancer. It's like, ooh, don't mention it. And now people tell you about their cancer without blinking. And I think to normalize the fact of mental illness is to need to talk about it as a mental illness, as an illness. I think the most important part of that is it's an illness. It's not a behavior trait. It's not a weakness. It's not something you can just snap out of. There actually is something going on in your brain that is causing you to feel the way that you feel. And therefore, it's actually appropriate to call it a mental illness. I even sort of shy away from calling it a behavioral health disorder or a behavioral health problem because then people they just think about the behavior. They don't think that it's actually emanating from somewhere in the brain. So you could call it a brain disorder, you could call it something like that. That might be a little bit more on point than a mental illness. But again, I think until we can sort of talk about mental illness like we talk about every other illness, we're going to continue to have people that don't seek care.
What would you recommend for a faculty member dealing with classes of students, many of whom have difficulties revealing themselves as a depressed person or an anxious person? What do you think about that? Is that something?
I think, depending upon, what your class is, I think more than anything, what students need is a welcoming environment. They need to know that no matter what, they're accepted. So whether it's, the first class of the year and you sort of lay out what your expectations are and you sort of indicate, people are at different places in their life when they come into this class or when they come into school. Some of you may feel better than others of you. Please know that, there is space for you to be who you are and how you are. I think sort of setting that table for students can be very helpful. And I think repeating that somewhere else along the line can also be very helpful. And then if somebody confides in you, you certainly want to try to do some of the stuff that was up there in the presentation. See if they need help. You see if you can direct them to someplace where they can get help, or they may just want to share it with you. And then they may sort of almost be asking for some sort of an accommodation when they're sharing it with you. So it really depends on the context in which they share it with you. But I think more than anything, sort of creating for everybody a welcoming environment that will hold, all the differences that people have, I think is really important. And I think to set that tone early on is really important. Yeah.
So how can we have your help in helping the legislature understand that, at least my experience at our community college here, we do not have the staffing to serve the students, particularly around a crisis intervention. We probably do a pretty good job with that, but our population comes to us, my experience anyway, we have a tremendous number of students who have anxiety disorders. They have not been cared for. And please correct me, we don't have a lot of resources for them. And then consequently, what happens for many of them is they begin to create an academic record that's really not reflective of their ability.
Right. I think if you don't have resources on campus, we can certainly, NAMI has an incredibly robust public policy component to it. We do a lot of advocating up at the state legislature for all kinds of things. This is something that's never actually come to our attention, that the community colleges are sort of short-shrifted on these kinds of resources, which is something certainly that I can take back to our public policy staff and have a conversation with them about.
What is our ratio?
Well, the difficulty is that the community colleges send a couple of messages about it. I mean, there are some of us who are counselors and licensed professionals on some of the campuses. You don't have to be a licensed professional to work in the counseling role. But at the one point they're saying, well, we need you to help these students when we have crisis situations, and then at other points they're saying don't do any therapeutic work on campus. So they send a mixed message about what the services are, and they send it in a way in terms of the staffing. We have 1.5, licensed counselors on campus right now, myself and Vivian, whom you've met. And some campuses don't have any counselors. Quinnebog Valley doesn't have any people who are considered, professional counselors. And some of the schools have people who are academic and career people, but are not comfortable at all working with mental health issues. So it's a challenging situation. We don't have a counseling center like CCSU would have.
Right.
But there are some schools who have farmed theirs out. I don't think Quinnipiac, has any services like that anymore. They privatized their services, so there were people working there who they send all theirs out to private.
But they do have services, but they're on campus.
I think, yes, I think that, but it's a privatized service.
Right.
It's not people working directly for that college. So, I mean, Allison, you can respond to this as well.
Well, I'm just going to think along with what Judy said, is there's a lot of that message that really they're supposed to be focusing on sort of academic counseling. And from that angle, when you've got a student who has other issues that are really impacting their academics, if we're not looking at those issues and addressing those issues, there's no way we can sort of help them in the classroom if we're not addressing those other things. And I think that really has been a message sort of from above us or whatever, and I don't mean our administration here, but I mean kind of from the legislature and that kind of
The
thing.
central office as well.
And the system office, yeah, exactly. But saying really it needs to be an academic focus, what they're doing. And if you've got a student in crisis, it really doesn't really matter what's happening in your history class today.
Right.
I mean, like, we need to get past this first.
Right.
And that's that message, that support for them to do that kind of work isn't there.
I think for your situation and the kinds of resources that you have, I think a couple of different things. I think one, you may want to really start to work with administration here to begin to sort of create a campus-wide sense that talking about mental health things is all right. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, and you can also share resources, not necessarily resources that you have on campus, but remember through the presentation it was talking about educating yourself about what's available. People can be directed to community mental health centers where there is a sliding scale.
We do that.
We have a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those kinds of things. And I would just make sure that that kind of information is as available as possible, not just in the counseling center, but really sort of, at tables during orientation week, whenever you do those kinds of things that are going to bring students together from across the campus. Those are really opportunities to share information about resources in the wider community. And I think that's sort of where you're left right now, is sort of doing that short of what you do for people in crisis.
And we do have some ongoing things, but we're working all the time to move students to outside services, whether through their insurance or through sliding scale or whatever. And we do have a behavioral intervention team that's developed over the last 3 years or so that does more and more all the time. Health fairs, brings in mental health professionals as well, and talking to and available to students. So there's initiatives. It's just sort of a mixed message that gets sent.
Sure.
People get concerned about everything they've seen going on across the country in colleges and in high schools and all that. And they want to do something, but they're afraid of the liability kinds of issues. Often, the administrators, would rather move those people off campus, immediately have them, withdraw from the campus and deal with whatever outside. And there's a large number of people walking around campus struggling with different kinds of issues. Different place on the continuum.
Right, and I don't think, I think that issue of sort of asking people to drop out, get better, and then come back is a national concern on college campuses. We hear it over and over and over again because once they drop out, it's really hard to come back. For a variety of reasons. They've dropped out and people know why they've dropped out. They've dropped out and it's just hard to get those wheels turning again to come back. And it's a national problem, and I think that some sort of legislation will eventually come out that sort of puts schools under a Good Samaritan kind of thing so that they're held harmless, which is really what needs to happen. I think the other piece of that is, and it's got to be really challenging at a college like Tunxis, is sort of being able to connect with the family. Because family members very often know that the individual is having challenges, might have known even before they came to school, have a record with that person of how they deal with it, and yet because they're adults, there's this huge wall of, now one of the things, you probably already know this, but one of the things you can certainly say to somebody is let them know that they can waive HIPAA. Because an awful lot of people don't know that. They don't know that they can waive it in part or in whole. And, you know, that conversation is, you know, would you like me to call, you know, your wife? Would you like me to call your father? Would you like me to call a friend? And if they say yes, then you ask them if they're willing to waive that part of HIPAA that says you can share that information. And a lot of people typically will let that be waived. It's just that people need to know that that's an option. Providers need to know, and students need to know that it's an option for them to waive that. And that very often will connect them with the strongest support system that they may have. And again, for a college like this, I would try as much as possible to keep putting in front of students what the outside resources are, and continue to make a climate where those resources are looked at openly, freely, and there's no, you know, sort of prejudice against someone who's very interested in that information.
I think we often walk a fine line. Often faculty members and administrators and individuals who are interacting with students are trying to determine, you know, a lot of the students don't want to leave school. It's the one place that's a good thing happening for them. They have support systems. So it's a real balancing act for us to try and be supportive as much as we can to them, get them the resources, be a support system that listens and lets them get things out. But you're still trying to teach a class, or you're still trying to, you know, have a schedule where you're advising and counseling and working with students.
Right.
So it's challenging. You're always sort of back and forth with the individual who might have referred them and trying to check in and make sure, how's this student doing? Are we doing the right thing? When do we need to make another choice in terms of, you know, moving it to the next level? It's a challenge.
Yes. The other thing I would say is, you know, if you get to the point with somebody where it's clear that they actually do need to sort of take a break and leave school as part of that, you want to sort of make sure that you've got policies and procedures in place that welcome that person back, that encourage that person to come back. You know, and hopefully, you know, some schools, if you drop out, they have to stay out for a year. You know, make the amount of time that they stay out. You know, if you can limit it to a semester, that's easier than if somebody has to be away from school for a year. And I would make it as welcoming as possible and as easy as possible for them to come back. I would, you know, somehow have the school stay in touch with that individual. We're hoping to see you again in the fall kind of letter. Those kinds of things, those kinds of policies and procedures could help some people actually return to school.
It usually comes through the dean's office, the dean
Right.
of students, and usually what he's looking for is some kind of a letter or support from a therapist that they've worked with to let them know that it's a good time, it's a good...
Right, I think that that's one piece of it, but I think they also need to know that beyond somebody saying they're okay to go to school, the school wants them to come back. And I think that that's not a message that necessarily gets out a lot to students who drop out under those circumstances.
I was thinking that too, is it's probably the stigma of having
That's
to
right.
leave.
That's exactly right.
Keeps them from coming back.
That's exactly right. And on top of which, you know, so many of them feel like it's just been they're a failure. You know, they couldn't hack it in college.
So if they're encouraged.
That's right.
A friendly encouragement.
You know, if they're encouraged and there's a climate that this kind of stuff happens, and, you know, sometimes people take a leave of absence because they've got to get a medical treatment. You know, there's all sorts of reasons.
Right, not just because they're checked off by the doctor.
That's right. Yes, yes. Anybody else? Questions or comments?
Well,
Yeah.
Dealing with sometimes more the academic side of it,
I've always found it real challenging when it comes to extensions for due dates, because myself or Val, we're not in a position of disability services to say to faculty, you must extend an assignment due date. So there's certain things we do have in place, though I know that's encouraged to be flexible, to try to talk through in situations with faculty when it's appropriate.
Mhm.
But it's iffy because of that.
I think part of the dilemma there is we are stuck in a 15-week, 14 or 15-week time capsule. In addition, this college relies heavily on a contingent faculty. So you don't want to extend, you know, you may be less likely to extend because you don't know if you're going to be hired back the next semester.
You know, I would disagree. I would say that, I would bet you that 8 or 9 times out of 10, if there's a problem with a student, and the student looks like he's, what is it? He's real.
Struggling,
He's
yeah.
not making it up.
Yeah.
There's no question that, yeah, sure, he can have an extension. If somebody, maybe sometime the student doesn't think the faculty will be understanding. And sometimes if a faculty is not understanding, I'm a faculty, by the way, if you contacted them over the phone and say, hey, you know what's going on with this person, I bet you that a lot of those problems would just go away. In my class sometimes, and I'm no different from anybody else, some students have come up to me with these stories that are unbelievable, and I'm saying, you know what, you're dealing with enough, you just forget this assignment, okay? And it works out, and they learn what they have to learn. So don't just say the faculty is stuck by rules, because I bet you
I'm not saying that, and I certainly am not a person that's lived that, but there are a lot of constraints, especially on people who are not seasoned faculty.
But
who
if
don't
you
have-
want to eliminate those constraints, they're not that hard to eliminate or be flexible.
But the people don't know that.
Well, from a learning perspective, though, I often say to the students, you don't really want too many extensions, because the class moves on. So I always try to look at that rationale with them, and so depending on how much they've missed, is it a situation where you can then communicate and talk to the faculty person about,
Right.
catching up? Sometimes it works out where there's, a break, so there's our opportunity to seize that moment. So I was talking more from a learning perspective.
Yeah, I think what's difficult for both Kathy and I in our positions is we really see the tail end, the cyclical nature of someone's psychiatric
Yep.
That's a
illnesses. And what's challenging is trying to figure out how we deal with that cycle, yet also honor the academic process
Yep.
of the college.
Yep.
And take into consideration that some people do like to play games.
Right.
So you have to be very judicious.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I think the cyclical nature is what we all find most difficult to deal with, because as we know, mental illness does not come on and then go away.
Right. Right.
And certainly someone in the bipolar category has even more of a challenge. And
Right.
I think Kathy and I would both say that people with the bipolar are people we struggle with the most. Students. in that
Yeah,
category.
again, I have to say that I think whether it's, the learning piece of it or the administrative piece of it in terms of will these teachers even be here next year kind of stuff, I think that a lot of that can get encompassed into a campus that has a climate that is welcoming for individuals with mental illness. And I think, therefore, administration can look for ways in which they can better accommodate, and they can allay the fears of, some of the teachers. They might be able to hand that course off to somebody else who's going to teach it next year and see, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. And I think what has to sort of lead that is the administration of the school recognizing that 1 in 4 individuals in college is impacted by a mental illness. So 25% at a minimum of the college body is going to be impacted. So, so you're going to have kids in your classrooms undeniably that are impacted. And so it behooves the administration to take a look at how can we better address this? How can we make this less stigmatizing? How can we make it easier for students to get accommodations? And how can we make it easier for teachers to give them those accommodations? And that really has to, I think, come down from the administration. But teachers can go up and request those kinds of things from administration so that they start to look at those things in a way that they may not yet be looking at them.
Is that something that you can bring to the legislature and so?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, I will certainly take this back to our public policy committee, and I will talk with them about this. As I said, this is an issue that's never really been raised before, that I've heard. So I can certainly do that and see what we can do. The current legislative session is ending, but next year is a long session. We can see if we can find a champion in the legislature who might, because there's an awful lot of focus on schools and mental health right now. Even bringing onto campus stuff like mental health first aid. I think you said that you were going to do that.
We did that.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Bringing that kind of stuff. Anytime that you can raise awareness among faculty and students, but you got to bring the administration along. And that sometimes is the biggest challenge. But we can certainly raise this issue and see if it can go anywhere in the legislature.
Coming at the same time as academic reform
Yep.
and expectations
Yep.
and all that, so it's at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and again, I think,
Testing, et cetera.
Yep. I think if we can raise that issue, we might be able to get some ground on that.
Kathy, is serving college students speak, is that still available?
Yes, I actually brought copies of it.
Oh, excellent. This is how we first met Kate. She had sent a copy of the survey, and it really is fascinating because college students were interviewed, and you hear their perspective and their feedback on what it's like for them and what has been helpful and areas.
Right. You can actually learn a lot from that, and again, that's something that, hopefully your administration has seen it. They brought it, and if not, you sort of, put it on their desk and ask them to read it. Yes.
We have to break shortly because
Okay.
there's a horrible meeting. We have to go to.
Hey, I didn't say that.
But just I want you to know that from a faculty perspective, I have gotten support from the Dean's Students Office when I was having problems with a student, and unbelievable support from the counseling office. So we do have people in place who are receptive and well.
Sure.
It's really
Sure, absolutely.
And thank you very, very
Yeah,
much.
thank you.